Hi, everybody. I'm going to give everybody about 1 more minute to go ahead and join up. So we'll start the webinar at 2:01. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming to today's webinar. I appreciate your time today, especially during this hectic season. So today's webinar is Accessing Your Cybersecurity Policies against Nist 800-171. Before we get started, just want to cover a few housekeeping details. So today's webinar is scheduled to last 45 minutes to an hour, including a Q&A session. Now, a large portion of today's event will be dedicated to that Q&A session. The questions were taken from the attendees today. When you filled out the form, you were asked if you had any questions, and those are the ones we'll be drawing upon for today's event. If for some reason there is an outage, the feed dies, the page doesn't or freezes, etc., just go ahead and wait for a minute and then refresh the page. This hasn't happened before, but just in case. So for your convenience, there is a link in the YouTube description to a glossary of commonly used terms. We are talking about government policy and government procedures, so there's a lot of acronyms, a lot of initializations that will be referenced during today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded. It'll be available on demand via the Exostar resource library. That can be found at www.exostar.com/resources. Also, from the invitation today, obviously you got here, so you can use that YouTube link you have anytime post-event, and that'll work for you as well. If you'd like to get a copy of this slide deck, or if you have any questions about the content today or any of the products that you see, please feel free to reach out to us at cmmc-team@exostar.com. Also, if you go to our website, www.exostar.com, there is a live chat feature, and feel free to ask any questions there as well. Now, in today's webinar, we'll be discussing the use of Policy Pro. If you'd like to follow along during today's event with Sean as he takes you through some of the capabilities and functions within there, feel free to set up your trial account. You will see a link in the YouTube description. It takes about 2 minutes. So if you'd like to, go ahead and start that sign up as we cover the agenda and some other opening items. So today's agenda, right? We're currently in the introductions and housekeeping, cover the housekeeping. Then Sean is going to present the policy documentation and management made simple within Policy Pro itself. And then we'll go ahead and jump to the Q&A session. Just to let you know, there will be an exit poll at the end. We'd love to have your feedback on that exit poll. It helps us plan for future events and to talk about the things that you want to hear. So I'm going to be joined on today's webinar by Sean Fornwalt. So my name is Kevin Hancock. I'm Director of Solutions Engineering or Sales Engineering, depending on the term of the day here at Exostar. Sean serves as the Director of Client Technical Support at ISMS Solutions, and he also works on the application team and the development team for Policy Pro itself. Previously, He worked in one of my favorite parts of the world for Harley Davidson down in Santa Cruz, California. And we're happy to have Sean here today to present the bulk of this webinar. So with that, Sean, I will pass it over to you.
Oh, thank you, Kevin, for that wonderful introduction. What we're going to do is we're going to go into the Policy Pro platform, and we're going to take a nice, easy step through of each of the different functions, as well as how we can use the tool to help make sure that we're covering all the necessary items that we have to cover for our DoD compliance under the 171 or the new CMMC standard. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to log in with our email and username, and this will be what you have set up your trial account with or what you've purchased under if you go straight to the purchased subscription plan. And then once you log in, you'll do your registration, you'll put in some contact information as well as adding in any users that you want to have using the product along with you. Now, each platform subscription does contain 4 user slots. You can change them, you can, take people off, put people on as the need arises. If you also would need, more spots because you have a larger team, please feel free to reach out to our support center in West Virginia, and we'll be able to help you out with that and add a couple extra slots for you, to fill that need. Now, once we get to the select a platform page, we are going to be deciding which standard we're going to be working on our policy documentation for. Now, this isn't a binding choice because each time you log in, you will be asked to choose which side of the platform you want to go into. And you can also change once you're in the platform between the 2 different standards. But because for today's demonstration, we're going to go through the 171 because that is the current regulatory standard that we have to meet as DoD contractors. And we're going to jump right on in, and this is going to be our dashboard. This is the landing page for when you select which of the standards you want to work with, and it's also going to give you a high overview of everything that you have done in your policy assessment as well. So the first thing you're going to see at the very top is an introduction. It's some general information about what the platform is going to be able to do. And you can also click on our View More, and it will actually show you all the different features that you're going to find within the tool itself. Now, the next thing that we do have, and I just want to point this out because it is a feature that was added in at no additional cost to our users, is our Bloomberg government analysis. So we have a partnership with the Bloomberg Government Group, and we bring you in different articles that have to do with federal contracting so that you can keep yourself educated as to the news around federal contracting. You can click on any one of these articles and it will take you directly in. You're also able to click on the analysis button on the left-hand navigation bar, and you can go in and take a look, and you can also sort it out by categories. So you can decide, if I'm looking for aerospace and defense, these are the articles that have to do with that particular industry, and you can read them at your leisure. And just like I said, educate yourself around federal contracting and all the different changes and nuances that we have to deal with as DoD contractors. But we're going to go back to the dashboard here, and the one thing that I want to point out before we get into any of the documentation part is that you will find that there's a CMMC button right here. That's because we're currently in the 800-171 side, and by clicking on that, we'll simply switch over to the CMMC side. Now, both sides do function similarly. They just have different nomenclature and different structure because of the different standards. Now, what we're going to do next is look at our document relevance dashboard. This will be empty and not populate if you have not put anything into the policy assessment section, which we'll cover in just a minute. But this is going to allow you to see all the different documents that you have uploaded for assessment, along with the scoring and all the other pertinent details that would come out of the policy assessment. You can also export this out in either an Excel or PDF format so that if you're trying, if you have your boss asking you for a status report, you can show that to them. And this also really works well as an audit trail because it shows the different times. And, once we get down to the management approvals, there are timestamps to say that at this point in time, this was our approved documentation. And then we went back and reviewed it, and now this is our new approved documentation. So it will fill that, requirement of going back and reviewing your documentation and updating it as necessary. Now, we can go ahead and click on any one of these to get to the policy assessment tool, but in order to assess something, we have to have policy documentation to assess. So even if you may have, several disparate policies that cover parts of your cybersecurity, maybe it was an internal memo or it's in the employee handbook, but what we provide with Policy Pro is our policy builder. And what this is going to do is that we've gone and talked with the experts, auditors, and consultants and put together templates so that you can use it as a wireform to build out your policy documentation for what your organization is doing to protect the data that it's storing. Now, each of these sections will have a prepare, gather, and a consult section, and it's going to go over in the prepare general information about this particular policy family, or in CMMC, they are called domains, but it's going to tell you what you should be expecting to have within this particular policy. Our gather is a primer list of the different documents that you may already possess that are going to go, quite far in answering those compliance questions that the standard is asking of your organization. And of course, because we understand, as a small business ourselves, that sometimes people wear multiple hats, sometimes, you don't have, you may not be a policy expert when you've been asked to write up this documentation. So each of our sections does have the consult because we also understand that this is a whole a business issue, not just one for IT. So it's going to give you some people that you may want to talk with and ask questions of so that you can really find the correct answers to put into your policy. And once we've gone through, we understand what we're going to be doing, what documents we should have together, and who we're going to talk to. We're going to go ahead and click on our Get Ready, or I'm sorry, our If We're Ready, Get Started button right here. Now, this is going to bring us into the policy builder proper, where we're going to have some housekeeping items at the top of the page, and then we're going to have individual text editors for each section of the document itself. So at the very top, we have the organization name. This is from what your registration name for the organization was, and this will be interspersed throughout the documentation where applicable, so that it really customizes the document. Instead of saying the company does X, in my case, it will say ISMS Solutions does X. And then again, this is put throughout the document so that once you export the document out, it is truly your policy document, and then you can maintain it and modify it as appropriate. Our second one that we have here is our department. This is the responsible department. Who is going to be maintaining, and enforcing this particular policy? In this case, we're putting IT security. If we don't have a dedicated security team, we can get rid of that and just leave it at IT. And once we click out of it, it will save it so that it will come out in our export in just a couple minutes. Our next is our issue date. This also works very well in setting up that, audit trail. We can go ahead and select whatever date from the calendar we want. So we're going to go ahead and pick today's date, and it will update it and save it. And then our next is who is going to be the approver, or whose signature do you need for this to be an actual company policy so that everyone is required to follow it. And then our last one is the tracking number. This is, pretty much any number that you would like, any special characters, any combination of letters. This is going to be your versioning number for your document itself. So we'll go ahead and click out, it will save it, and then we'll see that again in our export. So for each policy that we create, we need to have a purpose or a reason why we're writing this particular policy. And unfortunately saying, well, the DoD said I had to, or my prime said I had to, isn't really going to cut it. So what we've done with the policy builder is we've provided some, like I said, wire form language that you can read through You can adopt it if you like it. You can modify it so that it is more in line with how your organization is doing things. And the way that we're going to do that is this little black circle with the white pencil icon in it is going to open up our text editor when we click on it. So we're going to click on that. We have a fairly rudimentary text editor. It's not anything like Microsoft Word or, Pages, but it will get the job done for text-based entry. If you're going to be putting in Excel charts and pictures, it's recommended that you export the document out into its .docx format and then use a more powerful word processor to add in those additional features. So we can go through, we can look at the language, change it so that we're happy with it, and then we're going to go ahead and click our Save button. And then it will make any changes that we have up here. So if I select this and I just say I want to make it bold so it's noticeable, it will now update the language for any changes that I made. The same thing is true of the scope. This is where we're going to be identifying what is being covered and who has to adhere to this particular policy. Again, wireform language, you go through, modify it so that it's in line with your company's mission and goals, and then you can continue through the process. Now, the next part is where we get into the actual controls from the standard itself. We're going to go ahead and open up this first section here. Now, these two controls are related to each other. The point 2 derives from the point 1, so they are grouped together so that you can reference them back and forth as you're changing the wording and updating it to your organization's needs. The same functionality will work here. We have the black circle with the white pencil icon. This will open up our text editor. And we also have our reset button, which will take the language in the text editor back to the beginning template language. And this is in case you get too far afield and you're kind of lost as to where you meant to go, because it happens to me every once and again too, where I start writing policy and I just kind of get off into left field. And it's nice to be able to go back to the template and start over. Now, we do limit this reset functionality to groups, not to the whole document, because this is resetting 2 controls when there's a total of 22. So I'm not losing all the additional work I've done in the other sections, just in this particular grouping. And once we do that, it will go back and give you notification. It's not something that you can accidentally click. You have to have an affirmative or a confirmation that that's what you want to do. So we're going to go ahead and hit yes. And as we can see, this timestamp here has now updated to the current time, saying that the user with the name Sean Fornwalt, which is myself, made a change on December 15th, and then we have the GMT timestamp. This is good to know that if you're working with others on a team that, hey, this person made an update. I should probably go and check it before I go and make any changes myself. But what's really important here is that the way that we structure our templates is that we break each control out into an individual part, because there's 110 controls that you have to meet. And if you look at it in that point, or from that point of view, it becomes a daunting task. Instead, the way that we have this structured is that we're saying, I'm just going to work on 3.1.1 for today. That's all I'm going to worry about. I'm going to make some modifications. I'm going to add in some information, and I'm just doing it piece by piece, which makes it a more manageable task. Now, again, we can go in, we can make any changes that are required. We can go and hit our save button, and it will update the timestamp again. Once we've made the changes that we want to make in the policy builder, we're going to then export the document out into its .docx format. The way we do that is down in the lower right-hand corner. We have a black square with an upward-facing white arrow, and this is going to be our export button. So once we click that, it's going to pop out the document, and now we have it on our local system. Now, the way that our download works is that it does go to the default download folder that your browser has designated. For myself, it is my downloads folder. For you, it may be something else. So you want to make sure that's where you're looking for the document. Now, Chrome does this as well as most of the other browsers, is that if you click on the download bar, you'll be able to open that document up in the appropriate application, and then you can go forward making any edits that you need to make. So now that we have it here, we are going to take it out of protected mode so that I can edit it, and we're going to zoom in so that we can all take a better look. So sometimes you will get the spacing errors that come in. Those happen every once in a while. You can just add in a space. This is now your document that you can do what you want to with in order to explain how your organization is meeting the requirements of the 171 or the CMMC respectively. But all of that information that we put at the very top in the housekeeping section is going to come out in this top table. This is going to be here by default, but if for whatever reason you don't like it, you can always just remove it by simply deleting it. It's not a requirement that it's there. We found that it was something helpful for organizing the different documents that you're going to have at a quick glance. But as we can now see, all the different aspects from the policy builder have been aggregated together into a singular document. So now we have, we're saying, this is our access control policy. Here's our purpose for writing it, the scope to cover what is being covered, who has to adhere to it, and we're going to jump right into our first control. Now, this is another style decision that was made when we created the templates, is that we put in the number and the verbatim language from the standard itself so that it helps to organize your documentation. Some folks will write it where they don't put this in here and they don't feel that it's necessary. The reason why we put it in there is because with talking to auditors, consultants, and experts, it helps them to understand what is the organization doing to cover a particular control. So instead of having to read a 110-page document and then figure out what's covering what and what applies to which control and if it's enough, we're saying here is 3.1.1 and everything we're doing to meet the requirements under the 171A. So we can go through and check off, line by line, we're covering everything for this particular control. And then we're going to go to the next one with 3.1.2. And we're going to do the same thing again. This does lead to some inherent redundancy. But again, if it's worth saying once, it's worth saying twice to make sure that, there's no confusion. So this is the way that we set this up. Now, you can make any edits in here that you would like. You can, change the font, the color, the size, add pictures, add graphs, whatever you need to do to meet the requirements of the standard itself. But the Policy Pro platform does have functionality to help you figure out if you're covering all the necessary items. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to the Policy Pro dashboard, and we're going to select Policy Assessment from our left-hand navigation. Now, as you can see, I do have a number of documents in here for over a fairly lengthy period of time. So we're going to go ahead and go down to the bottom where we're going to have our upload button. So if you haven't uploaded anything yet, it will simply say to upload a document. But since we have something in here already, it's asking us to upload a new or revised document. So we're going to click on that, which will bring up our upload queue. We're going to attach the document to the queue from my downloads folder. I can clear this if I selected the wrong one. I can also select multiple documents to upload at the same time. Now, if I'm putting in multiple documents, it will bring them together or aggregate them together and treat it as a singular document. So that's really helpful if you may have, say, a password policy, an acceptable use policy, a mobile device policy, all as disparate policy documents. You can bring them together and score them under the access control umbrella. But what we're going to do for today's demonstration, we're going to take our latest document right here. We're going to submit that document, and now we have to wait for the assessment to complete. Only takes a couple of seconds. It runs through our algorithms and machine learning on our back end, and it brings out a score that, again, if I'm looking at it academically, It's average. The good thing is that this is not an academic score. This is a relevance score. It's saying this document is 71% relevant to this particular policy family. And then it's going to go into a little bit more detail and tell us what different areas were, put together to come up with this score. So the first one we have is relevance. Anything that scores a 50% or higher in its numerical relevance score is considered to be adequately covering a majority of the appropriate or the necessary items for this policy family. Doesn't mean you're covering everything. It means you're covering a majority of them. And we'll get into how we can figure out what we're not covering in just a minute. The next two that are on here are more checks. They're not going to affect your score, negatively or positively. They're there to make sure that the document A is the correct one that you're putting in here, and B, that you have made the appropriate level of customization if you're using one of our templates. So the model similarity is what is going to be checking to make sure that if you're using one of our templates, you have adequately customized it to your organization. Because the worst thing you can do is to take a template, say, that's my new policy, I don't have to change it, and then you get audited for whatever reason, and the auditor goes, well, your policy says you're doing X, but you're actually doing Y, or even worse, you're not doing anything. So you want to make sure that your documentation lays out and explains what your organization does to meet the requirement. We all have to meet the same requirement, but the way that we get there is unique to your organization. So we want to make sure that if you're using one of our templates, you've customized it enough so that it can really be called your document, no longer a template. The other one here is our word count. This is to check to make sure that the document is of an appropriate size for what it should be covering. Case in point, awareness and training has 3 controls in it. Access control has 22. Logically speaking, access control should be significantly longer than awareness and training. Human error can also let me upload into the wrong section, and it will check that as well. But it's also there to say, you're not going to cover this in 500 words. You need to add more detail to your documentation. Now, that's the cursory review of what the scoring means and how it can be used to assess where your documentation is according to the standard. This isn't looking at your implementation. This isn't looking at the controls that you put in place. This is your policy documentation. For all of those issues with implementation and the task management, the POAM creation, the SSP creation, Exostar offers an excellent product and certification assistant that will help you through that end of the process with much more granularity. Policy Pro was designed to create policy documentation, and then the implementation is then up to the user and whatever tools they may use. And I do recommend the certification assistant. But in order to really get a grasp of what we may have been missing in our documents, we want to click on the Detailed Scorecard link. So we go ahead and click on that. It's going to pop up again with what our score means and what the different aspects are. But now we're going to see what we've called our KENNY, or our key elements not included. We have 2 different types of KENNYs. We have our general policy KENNYs, which are, different terms and concepts that are typically found in a document of this type, but they're not necessarily tied directly to the standard. So it's more of a recommended or a recommendations list of things you may want to include. Now, our control specific, on the other hand, are mapped directly to the standard, and it's going to tell you precisely where in the document, at least at the control level, of where this concept should be found. Now, the first one that we have here is CUI and non-public information, and we also provide the discussion directly from the standard. And what this control is intended to protect or to prevent is that CUI and other sensitive material is not wantonly posted on publicly accessible systems like your company website, your Facebook, other social media, or any kind of sharing site on the internet. And it says it, right here that we have designated individuals that are authorized to do this and that the content is reviewed prior to posting. And it's saying that, we're not really sure if you're covering this concept, so you better take another look and determine if you are. And now what we can do from here, because of the way that our templates are structured, is that I can do a Control F or Command F for my Macintosh users out there, and I can put in 0.22. And it's going to take me right to that control in the document, and I can make the edits that I need to make sure that I'm covering what I have to. So what we can look at here is we're saying that, again, ISMS Solutions, because the company name from the policy builder, we designate authorized individuals to post this information. Okay, check one off. We're training these folks that they are to ensure that they, make sure that none of the stuff that they do post contains non-public information. Okay, mark 2. We're reviewing the content prior to posting, and then we're also reviewing the content that's already been posted to ensure that it doesn't contain any non-public information. So I would say that this covers that particular concept pretty well. So I can go back and say, okay, that's one Kenny that I'm not going to worry about because I feel that I'm covering it, from my point of view, that I'm covering it adequately. So what we're going to do now is go and say, okay, this one, I'm not worried about it. It's just one. I'm going to move on and find another one that I can go and take a look at. So if we scroll down here a little bit, we're going to get through the encryption stuff because it's a little bit wonky. But now we have after a predetermined number. And we can see that this one is applied to 3.1.8, or the limiting unsuccessful login attempts. So we'll do the same thing again. We'll go back to our document, do our Control F, do 0.8, takes us right to the section of the document that we need to work on. Oh, looks like we got another one of those spacing problems. We'll just take care of that. And now we can see that the document is saying, okay, we're enforcing a limit, but we don't have the limit. We need to actually define what the number is. So we'll go in here and we'll say, okay, this is going to be 5, and then attempts within, we'll change this to 2 minutes. And then if this condition is met, we're going to say that the account will lock automatically for 30 minutes. These numbers can be whatever your organization deems they should be. This is fairly standard across the industry, but you can change these to whatever your organization does. And now it's your policy about how you handle unsuccessful login attempts. Okay, we've covered that. That's great. We're going to move on and go to the next part. Now, a lot of folks, when I tell them, you can ignore a Kenny here or there, they're like, but aren't these things really important that I have to cover everything? So what I'm going to show you now is what happens if I don't put any documentation into the system at all, and it shows the stark difference between having documentation and not. So as you can see here, we have 53 control specific Kennys, and we have a 71%. Now we're going to go back up here, and we're going to select this particular document here. This is a completely blank document. So if I click on the document's name, it will bring up a document viewer. There's nothing here. So if I go back in, I look at my detailed scorecard, I can see that Policy Pro, under its policy assessment, is looking for 247 different key concepts within my documentation. Using the template, which is roughly what I used with some minor modifications, I'm covering all but 53 of them. So I'm covering about roughly 75 to 80% with the documentation that I'm assessing. So that's pretty good. I can then move on and say, this is why a couple of them may not apply. Because again, this is concepts that we're looking for in the documentation. You may have a completely unique way of handling a requirement, and that's good, because a unique way of handling it means that if someone else in the supply chain gets hacked, they can't use that same methodology to hack into your systems. So having some variance in how we approach this is also beneficial. Now, with all of that being said, and I understand that that was a lot of information to take in a short period of time, we do offer some educational resources on the site as well. So one of the first ones that I want to point out is our Ask the Auditor section. This is exclusive to the 171, and we went to one of the consultants and auditors that we worked with for the templates and the creation of the scoring algorithms and said, we're getting questions about audits. They want to know, how do I prepare for an audit? So we met up with Dr. Wasilina in our DC office and we said, here's the question that our users are asking. We want completely unvarnished your opinion and answer to this question. And what we've done is we've made a couple of videos where he just answered these questions in 4 to 5 minutes to give you the auditor perspective as to, how do I prepare? What key documents do I need? Do I need a lawyer present during an audit? And then also, what is the CUI program itself? And what happens if I don't comply with these requirements? Now, as more questions come in and, more audits or more assessments are done under CMMC, we'll be adding in that as well. And we'll also expand this as we get more and more questions from our user base about audits. And this is essentially, you don't have to pay the fee to talk to an auditor. We'll do that for you and provide you with the answer. The other one, and one of my favorite sections of this entire thing, because I am a bit of a policy wonk and I enjoy reading these technical documents, is our reference library. We've broken this down into a couple of different sections. We have, first of all, documents that just have to do with cybersecurity or IT in general. We have the Nist standards documents. This is going to contain everything we need for understanding what the requirements are. So we have the 171, the 171A, the 172, as well as the 53 and its assessment guide, and then also the checklist for different devices and software that are acceptable to use for federal and federated agencies under the 53, which is the 870. And then we break it down by individual policy family. If you're having difficulty understanding what you should be doing for a particular area, you can go in and read the documentation from Nist about what they're actually looking for, so you can make that decision for your organization. And it's as simple as we go in here, like I want to read up on VPNs. Okay, we go to the 877 R1. And now we've left Policy Pro, we've gone to the NIST.gov site where this document resides, because we don't believe in filtering the information that you use to make decisions for your organization. You should have the unvarnished information from the source itself. And then once we're here, we can go ahead under documentation. We can select the first link to pull up the PDF. And then from here, what I always like to do is to go to our, let's see, we need our table of contents here. There we go. So we can go directly to the table of contents in the PDF, and I can say, I want to know about network layer security. I click on this, it takes me to that section of the document. I read what I need to know. I answer the question in my policy, and then I go on about my day. You can read the whole thing if you want. It's only 166 pages, but it's dry technical reading, and it can be a little difficult for most. But you can come in, get the information you need, go back and answer the question in your policy, and you're done. Until you have to come back and review it in the next 6 to 9 or 12 months to make sure that there's no new risk that you're facing or vulnerabilities that became apparent in your system. But with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Kevin. That is how the Policy Pro platform works and how we can use the tools provided with it to write our documentation for ourselves.
Great. Thanks so much, Sean. Let me take back sharing here. Come on, you can go to screen. There we go. So everyone, just before we get to the Q&A and why I pull up those questions, just want to remind everybody about the exit poll. It is there in the YouTube description. If you'd like to complete that while we do some of the questions and answers, that would be greatly appreciated. So let's go ahead and kick it off. So hopefully this first one was answered as part of the webinar itself. But Sean, the first question is, do you have a template we could use as a basis for updating our existing cybersecurity policy that conforms to the requirements of Nist 800-171?
I would have to check, but yes, we do.
Thank you so much. So, if you will, that really is what Policy provides you, right? Policy Pro provides you that template to both compare your existing policies against those standards, and obviously to help you, write those policies as you go through.
Right.
So number 2. So do you need a policy for each of the 14 families of the Nist 800-171 or for each control?
Well, that's kind of an open-ended question, but you need to cover all 110 controls. How you structure that, how you set that up is entirely an individual choice. Like I said during the presentation, we went by policy family so that instead of having a huge 100 and some page document, you're working with 14 documents that range between 5 and 10 pages each. So, and that's really the design philosophy behind it, is that we're
Sure.
breaking it up to make it more manageable so that it's not such a daunting task for, a small organization to undertake.
Right. And often that is the issue. It's like, where do I get started? And this really is one of those great tools. It really helps you get started. Like it breaks it up into those bite-sized chunks.
Right. And just kind of, I'm not going to name names, but we do have several consultants that use our templates for their clients. So,
Absolutely.
just having that structure to build from, because I remember, all through undergraduate work, when I had to write a paper, I always looked for somebody else's to see how to structure it.
Absolutely. All right, number 3. So Exostar's NIST 800-171 policies include procedures embedded in the policy document. CMMC 1.0 called for separation of processes and procedures from policies. Do we know how CMMC 2.0 access processes and procedures from a content format and standpoint compared with policies, and how they're going to align with NIST?
So what we know from the release on November 4th of the 2.0 is that the maturity level documentation requirement is being removed.
Right.
The structure of how that's going to be broken up, we still are waiting for more documentation and guidance from the DoD. But, for those that are asking the question, and I'm going to call it what it is, it's a reference to the .998. Some of our CMMC templates do include whatever if it's IR, AC, .2.998. That was a way to try to, and again, this was done with consultation with experts in the field, ranging from folks that worked in military intelligence to auditors to, you know, everyone who's spent any time with this. And it was in an effort to combine some of the generalized processes and procedures that weren't like software dependent or hardware dependent that would be more likely to change, right? So those procedural manuals would be better to be separated. But with the removal of those, maturity level documentation requirements in the 2.0, those are going to be removed as we, build the new CMMC 2.0 module onto Policy Pro.
Thank you. Let's see the next one here. I'm a one-person shop. Does this simplify the standard for me?
Unfortunately, no, it doesn't. Well, let me put it this way. It does depend. If you handle controlled unclassified information, or CUI, then you have to meet the requirements of the 110 under the 171. If you don't handle CUI and you only handle federal contracting information, or FCI, then you're required to do the 17 controls under the FAR clause. So again, if you have a DFARS clause in your contract and you handle CUI, you still have to meet all those requirements. But remember, how you meet those requirements isn't necessarily specified.
Right. Right. And that's, to me, that's kind of the key there, right? Regardless of the size of the organization, you've still got to meet the standards. But clearly, the smaller the organization, the simplified, there may be a more simple approach, and it's kind of up to you to determine which of these standards you need to meet.
Right. And now there is one aspect that is going to be exceptionally difficult for a one-person shop, and that's the separation of duties.
Sure.
Right? Because
Sure.
obviously you can't split yourself, and you're probably not going to hire someone on just for that. So that would probably be a better, like a managed service provider, like one of the ones that partners with Exostar, would be a better option for something like that.
Sure. Good point. Absolutely. So before we get to the next question, just wanted to call out our certification assistant. So Sean did allude to this in his presentation. So we often get the question, so what's the difference between Policy Pro and Certification Assistant? So Policy Pro, as you heard from Sean's discussion today, saves you time and resources as you build and revise your security policies in line with NIST 800-171. It's an easy-to-use platform that helps organizations create and customize those policies to meet all those 14 control families. As CMMC works with NIST to further define those requirements, Policy Pro as a SaaS application will keep up to date on those changes. Now, Certification Assistant delivers a self-guided, step-by-step platform for streamlining the implementation of those controls and policies necessary to complete an accurate NIST 800-171 self-assessment or to prepare for that CMMC success down the line. Certification Assistant enables organizations to understand each control, the tools, processes, and policies needed to satisfy them in order to achieve your full compliance, and keeps track of your system security plans, your POAMs, as you complete those remediation activities that are identified. Moreover, because it is expected that CMMC will continue to leverage NIST, Certification Assistant provides that bridge to prepare for that CMMC certification. So just as we do with Policy Pro, there is a free trial. The link is there on the slide, www.exostar.com/CA free trial. So please give it a shot. Now back to our regularly scheduled program. So Sean, if a company needs to meet level 2 compliance, has policies written, does it have to have a CMMC manual?
Now, again, if your documentation for the 171 is up to date and complete, from the guidance that we've gotten from the DoD, the level 2, which is the advanced level, it is intended to mirror the 171, right? Once we get to level 3, we start bringing in the 172. But from everything that we've seen, that if you're 171 compliant and ready to go, everything should, in theory, transfer over as CMMC. Now, with the 1.02, which was the previous version, we had an additional 20 practices on top of the 171. So the 171 has always been the core of CMMC. They're just now removing all that excess and going back to what appears to be 171 with certification.
Right. Okay, great. Let's see next here. So is Microsoft's commercial cloud CMMC 2 level 2 compliant, or do we need to go to GCC, which is Microsoft's government cloud?
It's no matter what SaaS product or software suite that you're using, you want to make sure that it is at minimum FedRAMP compliant, because that's going to tell you whether or not they're, because again, they're looking at reciprocity between the different federal standards.
Yep.
So they haven't declared that yet, but they are working on that, because I just listened to John Ellis talk back on the 7th, where they are working towards that, where if you have a FedRAMP, certification, or you're FedRAMP compliant, that could carry over and say that, okay, you're also CMMC compliant. But that's part of that rulemaking process that we still have another, 8 to 23 months of,
Right.
because, and again, just because it could take 2 years for the rulemaking to finish, they never finished the
Right.
1.02 rulemaking. So we're still going to move forward with the information that is available, and we're constantly looking for new information, talking to experts to make sure that the tools provided in Policy Pro are the up-to-date tools and they can be used going forward, to maintain the policies that you're writing.
Absolutely. And just a reminder, everyone, it's kind of where we're at today, right? So with the new guidance we have, CMMC 2.0 is recognized as the future. However, that is going to be a 9 to 24 month period until that gets defined. What we do know is that NIST 800-171 is the basis, and at least what we did get in the clarification is that that will be the basis going forward. So what at a minimum today you need to start getting the NIST 800-171 controls satisfied. All right. So just a reminder, Exostar has a number of these webinars and other events. We had one last week. That's the one you see up there, the CMMC 2.0, what your prime expects. It was a great session, had both an Exostar customer as well as one of Exostar's MSPs that we just kind of talked about, who does quite a bit of that consulting around controls, getting your organization ready, etc. And then we have a whole host of additional information where you can go out and gather the materials you need to help you out. So we got a couple more questions here, Sean. Well, we just kind of answered one. Is there an easy way to access competent consultants for compliance verification? So I'll answer it first, just from an Exostar standpoint. So Exostar does have on its webpage www.exostar.com/partners. That's what you see down there, that partner listing. That does have a number of those MSPs that provide service around consultation around NIST and CMMC. Anything to add to that one, Sean?
No, I mean, pretty much at ISMS, we love to share. So when an MSP will approach us about, setting up on our platform, we're always going to bring them over to Exostar so that they can be vetted and then put onto that resource for any of the users that come in.
Great. And our last question. So, and we get this quite a bit. So what software tools are needed for a CMMC 2.0 level 2 compliance? Do I need an EDR? Do I need an SEIM, et cetera? And if so, which one?
Again, this is going to come down to the resources that are available in the organization, as well as the expertise of the personnel. So if you don't have people that are trained to monitor a SIEM product, it's kind of like buying a Ferrari without knowing how to drive.
Yep.
So, I mean, a SIEM product is an excellent way to monitor traffic that's going in and out and through your network to make sure that everything's on the up and up. But if you don't know how to read the audit logs of it and understand what it means, it's better to, and again, each individual organization will be unique. If you need to reach out to an MSP to have an expert do it for you, there's no shame in having those training wheels to get started. Because, 6, 10 years down the road, you may be like, hey, this is really taken off for us. We're going to hire in new staff, do everything on premises. We're going to do it in-house, but you have to get there first, right? And there's no shame in asking for help. Because and this is the way, or my philosophy on this entire thing, is that each organization that meets the requirements of 171 and they've truly written the policy, they follow the policy, they've implemented it correctly, and that they're being successful in it, is helping every other member of the DIB. Because again, to go back to an old adage, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Because if your suppliers get hacked, well, they're going to have some of your information too. So that could lead them up the chain, and now they're going to come after you, and they get you. They're going to go to the person that the next person in line. So doing, asking for help and looking to experts to handle like a managed service for you, absolutely acceptable, but you need to do the research for your individual use case on what software and hardware you're putting into place.
Absolutely, so much. So everyone, Sean, thanks so much for your time today, and everybody, thanks for attending. So just one last reminder: please do fill out that exit poll that you see in the YouTube description. This is what we use to plan our next events, and as we head out, many of us for various holidays, just want to thank everybody again for joining us. And if you do have any questions, feel free to email us at cmmc-pp@exostar.com. Or as I mentioned before, come to our website, www.exostar.com. There's live chat there. We'll be happy to answer any questions you have. So thanks again.